consciousness is the key, which is coded in the human behavior pattern. Our consciousness is not only what goes on in your brain now. Yes, I'm here, but I'm also in the future because I'm affecting the future. Universe could be a holographic projection.
오늘 강연은 헝가리 출신의 세계적 철학자이신 어빈라슬로 박사님을 모시고 우리 지구 우주선의 탑승자들, 우리의 삶과 미래를 위한 새로운 철학을 위하여 라는 주제로 이야기를 듣도록 하겠습니다. 인문학의 진흥을 위해 다양한 노력을 펼쳐온 경희대학교와 재단 플라톤아카데미는 세계 지성에게 묻는다, 문명전환과 아시아의 미래라는 주제로 문명전환 강좌 시리즈를 공동 기획하게 되었으며 그 네 번째 강좌로 오늘 어빈라슬로 박사님 특강을 마련했습니다.
A very great pleasure for me to speak with you here today. I hope to give you some ideas for discussion and then have a discussion with you, because these are issues that concern us all. I'm not giving a technical lecture. I don't intend to speak about just one specific topic. I have in mind to try to provide a framework, some kind of a basic orientation for seeing our problems, our presence, our future in perspective. We need a context. We tend to see the things that are immediately in front of us and not see the wider context in which we live. Yet this wider context, a universal one, it is one which gives you a total image of which we are a part, of which our problems are an element. This is the holistic vision. You might call it systemic vision, the vision of oneness. It comes from the new sciences, but its roots go back to thousands of years. It goes back to all the major religions, whether it's Christianity or Buddhism or Tao or Confucianism. All of these basic intuitions speak about a wholeness of which we are a part. Now, there is one thing that we learn in these new approaches now to science and to our problems. Unlike we have been dealing with the issues of the world, it is not true that whatever is good for us, for one part, is necessarily good for all. But we do have learned now that what is good for the whole system of which we are a part is necessarily good for us. So we should look a little bit at the overall context in which we live. The system of life on Earth. Humanity is part of that system of life on Earth, and our problems arise because we forget that we are part of that. I call this a spaceship Earth vision, because it is the case that we are living on a spaceship. Now, a spaceship is something artificial. It's not made by one of the major Korean companies. It has been made by nature. It has been around for billions of years. Life on Earth is at least 4 billion years. The spaceship itself is probably 8 billion years or so. And our civilization, of course, is much more recent, but still goes way back to perhaps 25,000, 30,000 years of cultural civilization on this planet. So we try to locate our problems in the context of a spaceship. Now, what is a characteristic of a spaceship is? What is it? It is that it has its source for whatever life there is on the spaceship. It has it on the spaceship. and that it operates in a context of an energy flow from the sun to a planet. It circles that planet, or perhaps it is that circles the sun if it's a planet itself. The spaceship is our planet. Think of ourselves there, think of our situation as being the crew, the inhabitants of a spaceship. It has all the resources there, and we have to take care that these resources are not overexploited, not misused, but are sufficient for all people to live on this planet. It's our responsibility to keep this in good condition. The spaceship itself took care of itself for many, many millions, if not a couple of billion years. The spaceship as a living whole. A spaceship is the biosphere. And we perform work because there is a source around this spaceship, which is solar energy, the energy of the sun, which reaches us, and we can make use of that. Now, this particular characteristics of this system are that it's open to energy, constantly inflow of solar energy. This is the source of all life. If this flow would stop, even if for a couple of weeks, the greater part of life on Earth would disappear, would cease. Only the very deepest oceans would be able to maintain life for a few months, and even then they would not be able to survive. Life feeds on energy, and the energy is provided by our sun. At the same time, this spaceship is close to matter. What I mean by matter, I mean material resources. What comes into the spaceship? Hardly anything, other than some meteorites, some rocks circling around in space. And we hope that those rocks that reach the atmosphere are not too big, that they'll burn up before they reach us. Because if some rocks reach us before they burn up, they could create a catastrophe for life. The dinosaurs had a reign of 230 million years or so, and that reign came to an end when a giant rock, a meteorite, hit the Earth, changed the climate, changed the entire ecosystem on Earth, and these forms of life could no longer maintain themselves. What is the outflow of matter? Is there any? Hardly any. Now we are creating some satellites that we are shooting up beyond the gravitational field of the Earth, and some of these satellites do not return to Earth. So that's matter that's leaving the Earth. Some meteorites coming in, some artificial satellites leaving. They're not significant in terms of the thermodynamics of our life. We can say with good conscience, we live on a spaceship that's open to energy and close to matter. So what is the proper operation of this system? You have to use the inflow of quasi-infinite energy to maintain all the matter-based systems, human beings, life, all kinds of life, the whole ecosystem, the climate, everything we have has to be maintained through this flow of energy. And at the same time, since we cannot get new matter into this spaceship, and we don't get rid of it, we have to use the matter that we have, the resources they have. That means the chemical resources, the material resources, the metals, the minerals, and the biological background of this, the eco-basis. We have to use it so that it constantly fuels, supports the systems that we have created. Life has evolved on this universe, on this planet rather, and probably elsewhere in the universe as well. And life needs a constant inflow of energy and resources. We have to maintain that. So we should conserve, recycle all the material resources that we have here. What if we don't? Then the waste, the unusable waste, will accumulate on this spaceship. And this is called pollution. And we will not be able to make use of that anymore. We have to recycle what we have got on Earth so that we're able to use it for our own life, for all life on Earth. For the past few hundred years, there has been two different systems operating on this planet, on this spaceship, if you like. The natural life support systems, of which humanity used to be a part. I say used to be, because for the past several hundred years, another thermodynamic system has appeared on this spaceship, on our planet, and this is made up by humanity. We are using energy sources that we are creating ourselves. We are liberating the energy of the atom, nuclear energies. We are bringing in solar energies that have been conserved in biomass, liberating from the biomass the energies, adding to the energy flows. And we are using it in different ways. Some of the ways that we are using it are creating a very rapid degradation of energy, and therefore creating waste. So there is, for all practical purposes, we have two systems: a natural life support system and a human social, ecological, economic system. These two systems need to operate in harmony, need to operate the same way. Our current practices are unsustainable. We have created two separate systems. And this social, ecological, economic system is using primarily our finite stocks of onboard fossil energy to sustain and build these matter-based systems. We are using the energy that we have on board. These are fossil energies. Of course, we're increasingly using solar energies. We're using nuclear energies. But the bulk of the energy that we are still using is fossil. And keep in mind one thing that is very seldom mentioned. When you supplement the energy that we get from the sun, which is our basic energy source, with non-fossil additional energy sources, with nuclear energies, that means we are inserting energy into the system, energy that wasn't there before. We are not just using the energy that is reaching the system, which is sun. We are adding to it. And that means we are changing the balances, the energy balances. What does this do? This creates a whole new thermodynamic system. The effects are the heating up of the atmosphere, the changing of the balances of nature, the entire climate change, the change of rainfall patterns, the change in aridity of the soils, the change in the great ocean currents, whether it's the Humboldt or the Gulf. And that means that we are threatened, if we are not careful and we are not lucky, we are threatened with major climatic changes. For example, the Gulf Stream is what keeps most of Europe a livable place. If the Gulf Stream will no longer reach the shores of Europe, the northern Europe, then the climate in Europe would be similar to northern Canada, to Labrador. England, Scandinavia, northern France and Germany would have the climate of northern Canada, of Labrador. Same with the Humboldt Stream. So if we are adding energy without integrating that into the current energy flows, we are changing the balances. We are changing the operation of this thermodynamic mill so that it is no longer serves the purposes of life. Sure, not Earth will suffer in the end, not the physical planet, because there will be other species, other forms of life appearing, and they'll flourish because they'll have a new niche, they have new access to new energies. But this kind of life that we are representing, the higher mammal species, human beings, we are built into the kind of thermodynamic patterns that have appeared on Earth since the last ice age for the last 10,000 years. And that is a danger to change that. So you have to be very careful to keep the balance between the inflow and the outflow of energies. At the same time, we are depleting the stocks of energy, of usable energy. When we use up something in a way without recycling it, throwing it back into the environment, then we are exploiting a resource in a careless and fatal way. Some resources can be recycled. Some resources material resources can reach a point where it becomes very expensive to recycle them, or becomes almost impossible to recycle. In that case, waste is accumulating in this spaceship. Think of it. We are only using now on inboard batteries, fossil fuels are on onboard batteries. That's what we brought with us. That's what we have on the spaceship. We are not using the inflow of energy enough yet from the sun. And what we have here are basically these material resources, which we are carelessly picking up, using, throwing back. This has been known as the cowboy economics. You are lassoing sort of the energy resources, using it, throwing it back in. Now we are learning that this is not the way to do it. We can't maintain 7.5 billion people on Earth using this kind of technologies. I'm not saying that we are still doing this on purpose. We are recognizing that we must change it. But still the overall dynamic of the system is such that we are using much of the material resources in an irreversible manner, and we are changing further the energy resources by using the inflow of energy in a different way, or adding to that inflow. And this is creating unrest on Earth. I'm trying to, you see, ladies and gentlemen, I'm trying to trace many of the major problems that we face today to an unwelcome, to careless use of the resources that we have on this spaceship. Not well distributed, not well exploited. Some get more than others, and many of the poorer people, many of the people in the marginalized lands are locked into a more and more difficult situation. We have environmental risk. I'm going to go through in the next couple of slides. I want to go through fairly quickly, because we know about these things. We have health and safety standards, ecological destructions. We have problems all along, and now it's becoming known. We are waking up to these problems, but we have to look at it in this overall holistic, systemic context, that we live on a spaceship, that we are not operating properly. The consequences are the heating up of the atmosphere, which I think is the greatest single danger, ecological danger, because we need water for life. And if we change the climate so that it heats up, the atmosphere is heating up, we'll have less and less rainfall, and some of the rain that we are getting, like the monsoons, will be discharging over the seas rather than where they are needed over the land. And then, of course, the agriculture will suffer. The consequences, the long-term consequences, are really, really very important. The long-term consequences will be the aridity of the planet, the lessening of the usable water supply on the spaceship. We don't know, but there is some indication, I think fairly good indication, that the other planet around the solar system that could have supported life, Mars, that Mars did support life at one time. There's indication that it had water. It no longer has surface water. And life, at least on the surface of Mars, has disappeared. That could be a fate of Earth, unless we are careful, unless there's an ecological catastrophe. We need to maintain the balances so that life becomes continually possible on Earth. When we have, for example, melting the polar ice, then water becomes, ice melts, water is darker than ice, reflects less light, and therefore water heats up more. It doesn't reflect the heat, it absorbs it. Therefore, it melts more ice. And this is continually going on. In the Arctic, for example, melting the ice, putting more and more water into the seas, which seas then rise, and the entire climate becomes warmer. So what was up till now a gradual process could become a very quick rise in temperatures, in this case, a very big change in climate. Sometimes a process that was thought to be a gradual, piece by piece, can become very fast. This is typical of what is known in science as a bifurcation process. See, if the CO, the carbon dioxide content of the atmosphere, would reach 4 times the level of pre-industrial level, then according to some calculations in the Princeton lab, the average northern hemisphere would rise by 8 by 12 degrees Celsius. That kind of rise, is no longer permits civilized living, no longer agriculture, no longer the kind of life that we could accept as being possible for the majority of living people on Earth. So CO2, very important, our carbon footprint, which we're all recognizing today. Do we let these processes play out? If we let them, we'll face an ultimate disaster. Very easily possible that we create conflict situations. Conflict situation will give rise to violence. Violence can bring in the use of weapons of mass destruction. The scenario is not difficult to imagine. The scenario would be one in which higher forms of life would disappear from the face of this planet, become radioactive. It's possible. There could also be a slower process of the water disappearing more and more fast from the surface of the Earth, water wars beginning. But many, many scenarios, they're all disaster scenarios. What I'm saying is, no, we don't need to move to those scenarios. We can find something else. We can change, because this is one epoch. This is the beginning of the Anthropocene, the beginning of the era of the human-controlled planet. We will either be the first generation in a new era in the history, a new era of Anthropocene era on the spaceship, or we may be last generation in the history of the spaceship. Ethics is no longer just a question of a philosophical discussion when we have the time, when we have the leisure. Ethics is really the question of what is good. How do we act so as to maximize our good around us? It's not enough to act only to satisfy ourselves, because we are part of a larger whole. I started by saying, ladies and gentlemen, but what we are learning, that what is good for the part is not necessarily good for the whole. But what is really good for the whole is good for all of its parts. So we have operated in a very narrow perspective. We have lost our instinctive connection, our instinctive harmony with the larger system around us, with nature. And therefore we have sought only our own interests, to become rich, to become powerful, to gather all the resources we can around us, and never really mind the consequences. Now we are learning, of course, we are learning, but it's high time to learn and to move from here. So we have to move on to an ethics which is good for all of humanity and all of nature. We have to develop an anthropocentric, eco-anthropocentric ethics. But we have to condemn all things that are a danger for the community of life on Earth, which is violence, which is war, which is miscomprehension, animosity, which is the overuse of resources, underestimation of the dignity, of the necessity of human life on Earth, underestimation of our belongingness or harmony with the world around us. We are on the point now of a sudden change process. The classical idea of change coming from Darwin and the modern industrial ethic, industrial ethos, was you change little by little. You make a pass, you improve something here, you produce a better effect over there, you innovate something, you have a little by little, you create change. Well, this only goes for a while, because all of us in this system, in this spaceship, all species are constantly in movement, are constantly in fluctuation. Your own body is constantly in fluctuation. If you measure the temperature of the blood, you find it fluctuates constantly. Sugar concentration in the blood any other concept, any other, the EEG patterns in your brain constantly fluctuating. But they are kept back to a given norm. Now, when you go beyond that fluctuation, where it can be brought back by what I mentioned, negative feedback, then you have continuation of the same system. When you cannot bring it back to a norm, then what happens to an individual biological body? That body disappears, it dies. A society doesn't need to disappear. Society can reprogram itself. A society can have different values, new practices. We cannot change our DNA in our lifetime, but we can change our social values. We can change the rules by which society operates. And the rest of my remarks tonight, ladies and gentlemen, are really devoted to the question, what norms, what guiding principles we can have to finding those set of values, those concepts by which we can guide our steps on this spaceship Earth. We have to move from the level of confrontation and violence over to peace and ecology, so that we understand that we must find a way in which our lifestyles, our values, our ambitions, our aspirations on this world are compatible, are coherent with one another. Otherwise, we'll move to a breakdown, and then one of those scenarios that I just mentioned, which would lead to the end of human life and possibly the end of all higher forms of life. That kind of scenarios could come about. We don't want to do that. We don't need to do it. We are conscious species. We need to develop the kind of consciousness that can move us over into the next level. We have had many ages of humanity, many eras, from mythological age to the theocratic civilizations, to the logos, rational kind of civilizations. In the Middle Ages in Europe, mixed very much with the theocratic Christian concept. In the East, in Asia, you had the Taoist, the Confucian, the Buddhist concept still becoming dominant over the centuries, over the Middle Ages. And now we are moving an age where we cannot move on separate principles, on separate civilizations. We need to find a union of civilizations, not one in which merges all of them in uniformity, but one in which all of them can survive in its own way within the constraints, within the limits of life on this spaceship. That is the holistic civilization. Our body is not just the one kind of cell, one kind of organ. It's a collaboration, a cooperation between many different kinds of cells and organs. We have to learn how to cooperate, maintaining our diversity, maintaining the diversity of all life on Earth. Consciousness is the key. I will only say about this now. What we do is, in the final count, is how we see the world and how we see ourselves in the world. That is what I mean by our consciousness. Our consciousness of who we are, what the world is. That has to change. We have, in the past 300 years or so, since we have created that other system over the natural life support systems, the human ecosystem, we have had a different vision in mind, a different concept. Humanity as separate from the natural systems, humanity as above nature, above the universe, as a unique singularity. That, in a way, is a mistaken comprehension. It creates all these problems. The misuse of our energies, of our resources, the misuse of our relationships to each other, of our powers. It has to change. We must develop what we in the Club of Budapest call a planetary consciousness, which is thinking and feeling, is the knowing as well as the feeling of our interdependence. That seems like an ideal, but it's a precondition of life on this earth. We need to create a new identity. We are members of a family on this spaceship. We are all members of it. No, you are not I and you. We are all we. We have to learn to talk in this way, to think in that way, that we are different from each other. Yes, we have our identity, but we belong to the same family. And our future is tied together with one another. And the key element is this planetary citizen consciousness. We have to become citizens of the planet. It's not about to be ego-centered or to be a social consciousness, all important elements, not negating, building onto them, building them together onto a higher level. Ecological consciousness is a part of it. We must avoid conflicts between social benefits and ecological benefits. It's not a question of one against the other. What do? We must consider the larger picture. We must maintain this spaceship in good order. And that kind of consciousness will allow us to discover what we need. We don't need prescriptions. We don't need anybody to tell us what to do. But we have to recognize that we are part of this larger unit of Earth, of life on the spaceship. Evolve your consciousness, that I think is the key. Evolve your consciousness so you can evolve consciousness. We can now take evolution into our own hand. Not the evolution of our body, because that is coded in our DNA, but the evolution of our society, the evolution of life on Earth, which is coded in the human behavior pattern. What humans do on this planet is the way this planet will evolve. I founded the Club of Budapest for the purpose of calling attention to these issues, trying to make them understandable. We need a new ethos, a new ethic. We need a new culture. And that's not only an intellectual culture. It has to be a feeling culture. It has to be expressed in music, in dance, in literature, in poetry, in everything we do. Not a separation culture, not a materialist culture, not a one that reduces everything to a single factor. It's not money that rules the world. It shouldn't be. What rules the world must be our understanding that we need to work to live together, to evolve together. The beautiful Buddhist notion of dependent co-evolution. We have to co-evolve because we are all stemming from the same source. And the future depends on whether we can evolve together. We can do it because we are conscious beings and we are beginning to wake up. The call to wake up is to call to recognize our oneness. I use a term, and I'll end on this note, ladies and gentlemen. I use a term which gets from science, which is coherence. Coherence means being in contact, being responsible. One in a system, one thing is coherent with another. They are joined, they are communicating. So that what one does is felt by the others. What one does in a healthy human body, any one cell, is felt by all the other cells. All the other organs respond. We need to recover our coherence. And coherence is none other than what you have known in your culture, in all Eastern cultures, for thousands of years, which is harmony, seeking our oneness, seeking that bound within which we can operate the spaceship Earth. Spaceship Earth is a super technological concept. Coherence is a spiritual concept. It's the harmony. The two has to be brought together. Our technologies must serve our coherence, must serve our oneness. If we can do that, and we can do it in principle, then we'll have a bright future on Earth. But for now, the future is not to be predicted. The future is to be created. And it's up to you and me, ladies and gentlemen, to create it. So let's do our best. And let's thank you for your attention.
사실 지금 오늘 그 라슬로 박사님이 강연하신 내용은 굉장히 이제 대중적인 어떤 강연을 염두에 두시고 굉장히 프랙티컬한 실천적인 이야기들 중심으로 이야기를 하신 것 같습니다. 이 라슬로 박사님의 오늘 지금 진행할 대담 내용은 프랙티컬한 내용을 말씀하셨지만 이론적인 어떤 몇 가지 사안들을 좀 여쭤보는 걸로 가름하고자 합니다. 라슬로 박사님은 이 사실 가장 중요한 개념이 로고스의 시대에서 홀로스의 시대로라는 말씀을 하십니다. 사실 한마디로 정의를 하자면 모든 것은 연결되어 있다는 것이거든요. 또 라슬로 박사님이 또 이런 말씀도 하십니다. 그러니까 물질의 시대, 매터의 시대는 갔다. 이제 퀀타의 시대가 왔다. 이런 말씀을 하시거든요. 자, 이런 그 이론적인 어떤 설명과 라슬로 박사님이 말씀하시는 홀로스의 시대, 또 전체적 사고의 시대라는 것은 무엇을 의미하는지 한번 여쭤보고 싶습니다.
Well, we are rediscovering that at the bottom or the foundation, the universe is not only interconnected, it's fundamentally one. Our consciousness is one, our life is one. I think the development of the galaxies moves in the same direction. Think of it that the universe could be a holographic projection. Seems like a purely ideal concept, yet it is very seriously entertained today. There's a holographic theory which was begun by the famous physicist David Bohm in the 1980s, in a book actually published in 1980. And since then, Gerard de Hoof and famous physicists have developed this. Just to give you an idea, you may not believe this theory that the universe is a hologram, but it gives you an idea when you look at in more detail at what is fundamentally at the bottom of physical reality. You don't find separate pieces of matter. You find energy in a particular structured, informed way. The concept, again, of information is very, very important, very basic, because information is what governs the world. You can think of the laws of nature as being instructions, behave in certain ways. Well, what is behaving is not separate bits of matter to which you can reduce things. It's a completely different concept. Now, the details of these theories are coming up all the time, new theories, but the basic concept remains the same, and it's more and more clear that what we are manifestations of a single overall cosmic process, the cosmic process that evolves. So the philosophical aspect of it is change from this material, local, realist individualism, which says, I am here, I am now. Going change to the point where I say, yes, I'm here, but I'm also in the future because I'm affecting the future. But I'm also in the past because I was affected by the past. And I'm not only here, but I'm also there because I'm affecting you, I'm affecting everything around me. So as a particle, we know, is entangled with all other particles. We are not separate, individual, reducible bits of pieces. And this is a different ethos. It's a different orientation. It's a different consciousness, if you like. Now, of course, I'm not asking you to believe or to embrace any one particular theory, because they are still in development. But what comes forth from the quantum concept, that we have all this interdependence and interaction, which is not limited by the classical limits of space and time, but it's instant. So instantly part of a larger whole. That, I think, is the key element of the new concept of the world. Now, if that is the case, then we have to realize that what we do on this earth, which itself is a macroscopic quantum system, has a very vital immediate effect. We may not notice it immediately, but it has an effect. What we do affects all other things. So we can come back to basically an intuitive, wonderful saying by Mahatma Gandhi, who said, be the change you want to see in the world. Because when you change things around you. But if you become that change, if your consciousness changes, that's what really makes a difference. And that's what we need. Planetary consciousness, based on the idea we are not separate little units, mechanical units. We are part of a larger community of life on this planet, and this planet is part of a community of life in the universe.
네, 아주 지금 현대 물리학에서는 빅뱅을 가지고서 우주의 시작이라고 말을 하고 있는데 라슬로 박사님은 그 빅뱅 이전에 그 무엇인가 있다는 거죠. 이제 그게 조금 설명을 좀 더 해주시면 훨씬 지금 하고 계시는 말씀들이 더 청중들에게 잘 전달되지 않을까라는 생각이 듭니다.
These are called the multi-universe scenarios. They are, for example, a theory of the quasi-steady state cosmology by Fred Hoyle and others. It shows that universe-creating events happen from time to time. In other words, there is no big bangs, there are bangs only.
Okay.
So the fundamental reality is this cosmic quantum field which periodically undergoes evolution, creates universes. Universes go through the life cycle. They fall back into this quantum field, and then it can be regenerated again. So the universe is a temporary process. Every scenario that we now have of the evolution of universe ends in the end of the universe. It's a finite system. So these things that happen in this universe, like life, for example, is not possible infinitely. It has a finite period, after which it's no life, no complex systems of any kind would be possible. It's interesting, a few years ago they discovered that even if this universe would be balanced between extraction and contraction, even then complex systems could not survive forever, because no more after a given time, no more stars could form, and the existing stars would become black holes. But the fascinating prospect is, you see, that these universes that are created have memory. So each universe builds on the previous universe. Oh. And possibly the consciousness that has evolved in one universe may not end, may be transferred, may be built into the next universe. So it's a bit like our body and our mind. Our body is mortal. Our mind, according to all Oriental Hindu Buddhist teachings and all traditional spirituality, our mind continues and can be reborn. Maybe the same with the universes. It's a very important process because the mainstream physics, even today, says after the Big Bang, a whole series of random processes created everything that emerges in the universe. And it turns out now, randomness is not an explanation of complex systems. They're far too complex. Human life, created by random processes, the age of the universe will not be enough. Let me just mention one little factor here. The great physicist Fred Hoyle calculated that if you take this cube, the Rubik cube, you can probably explain that has 6 faces and colors, and the idea is you get it from a scrambled form and you unscramble it. Now, if you do it by chance, without getting any information about it, you unscramble it, how many moves would you take? Suppose you take 1 second per move. According to Hoyle, it's 10 on the 27th second, which is longer than the age of the universe. So even a single Rubik cube, by chance, cannot be unscrambled by probability, according to probabilities, of course. And this is not a new concept that is there in Hinduism. It says Brahman breezes. Breezes in, breezes out. It creates universes, it brings it back down. Again, breezes in, creates another universe.
흥미로운 말씀을 하시고 있습니다. 그렇다면 이제 좀 도발적 질문을 제가 할 수밖에 없는데요. 지금 현재 한참 논의되고 있는 것이 artificial intelligence입니다. 인공지능이죠. 그런데 많은 사람들이 예측을 하기를 인공지능이 언젠가는 인간의 의식을 대체할 것이다. 다시 말하면 결국 이런 메커니즘을 기계가 그대로 복제할 수만 있다면, 다시 말하면 빅데이터가 축적된다든가 그런 데이터가 축적될 수 있다면 기계도 의식을 가질 수 있는 거 아니냐라는 이야기들이 지금 많이 나오고 있거든요.
Well, we have different concepts of consciousness. The modern age concept about which is underlies what you are talking about is that consciousness is produced by the interaction of neurons in the brain. Okay? So if consciousness is a product of the brain and the brain operates or creates consciousness by certain patterns of firings of the neurons, then you can replicate these patterns in an artificial system, and you have consciousness. But this is the brain-produced theory of consciousness. I don't maintain this. I argue against this. Because I don't think that consciousness is something that's produced by the brain. If it was, you see, then consciousness would disappear when the brain no longer operates. But now we have tremendous evidence that when the brain stops operating, whether temporarily or even permanently, but temporarily in near-death experiences, for example, consciousness persists. It would not be possible for consciousness to exist when the electroencephalograph is flat, when there's only a single line. And yet, estimated 12 million people now have reported consciousness during the time that they were in the hospital and their EEG patterns were flat. There are many reports from mystics, channeled reports and so on. And some of them can be veridical, can be examined and found to be veridical, that consciousness persists even after the individual has died. So this is not possible if consciousness is produced by the brain. Now, if consciousness is something that exists in the universe, in nature, and is received by the brain, you see, then it's sort of similar like a television program, which exists also when you turn off the television receiver. See? And you can pick up any other television receiver, turn it on, and you can receive the program if it's tuned to the right wavelengths. So consciousness could be a universal phenomenon. You cannot explain conscious phenomena if you think that it's uniquely produced by the brain. Sure, the brain translates visual impressions, sensory impressions. But there are higher levels, so-called transcendental experiences. Our brain is a receiver. And the question is, can we build another receiver, a non-biological receiver, that will pick up that consciousness which is in nature? Now, we as human beings, very complex systems. We cannot reproduce a brain, the complexity. It's far too complex as yet, you know. We can reproduce certain programs, certain elements, certain operations of the brain, you know. So I don't see how we could, at least at the present time, have a receiver, a non-human, non-biological receiver that can pick up consciousness in the cosmos, you see. That's why I don't think you don't replace it. Our consciousness is not only what goes on in your brain now. Our consciousness is also what you perceive in this world from the beginning of your life, from your past lives, and from the lives of other people around you. It's all together, because they had these transcendental elements of consciousness. There's a whole school of psychology called transpersonal psychology. These transcendental experiences, transpersonal experiences, you know, have been based on experiments also. I started my active life career as a musician. And I started asking these philosophical questions while I was a professional musician. And I think there has an element of sensation of what it is when you are experiencing music. I think all musicians will tell you that when everything goes well, especially when you are performing and your audience is coming with you, you experience a deeper harmony, sort of a deeper unity. And it's outside of normal space and time. And it makes you think that there is something more beyond your everyday experience. There's also a deeper experience. It can be a religious, spiritual experience. It can be an artistic, aesthetic experience. It can be an experience, an ethical experience, an experience of collegiality, of cooperation with people. And it can be an experience, which is nowadays very popular in the world, an experience of love. So I cannot reduce consciousness just to the here and now, just to the brain. It's something much deeper than that. And that's why I don't think we have artificial intelligence that would be capable of being that consciousness that we create, that we reproduce, that we receive in our brain.
이 라슬로 박사님이 이런 이론적인 어떤 철학적인 작업만 하신 게 아니라 또 그 유엔 일이라는 유니타와 관련된 일이라든가 실천적인 일도 많이 하신 실천적 지식인이십니다. 그러니까 단순하게 그냥 공부만 하신 분이 아니라 그러한 어떤 활동에서 우리들이 볼 수 없었던 그런 한국의 모습을 보셨을 것 같아요. 그래서 한국 사회가 어떻게 변화해야 되는지 들려주시고 싶은 말씀이 있는지, 한국 사회가 어떻게 변해야 되고 또 그게 따라서 앞으로의 미래는 어떻게 해야 되는지 한번 한 말씀 남겨주시면 좋을 것 같습니다.
I cannot understand fully Korean culture. I see the tremendous cultural heritage that you have. This cultural heritage comes from a combination of Buddhism and Taoism and Confucianism and Christianity. And I see how deeply embedded it is in people. You can talk to any reasonably educated Korean person, and he will come up with these ideas of seeking the harmonies, trying to be ethical and so on. And life is not just being a finite thing here and now. There is a deeper instinctual basis for Korean culture. On the other hand, I see this tremendous technological miracle that you have. At home, I have a Samsung television, a Samsung refrigerator, something telephone, etc. You know, I mean, wherever you live in the world, you get Korean technology. So you have that, and Korea becomes a very important element in the contemporary world. You might say, in some sense, the way Korea goes, the way thinking goes here, will have a very major influence. So you have all the good presuppositions in Korea for having a flourishing development. You have the technology, you have the intellectual background, you have the traditions, you have an educational system. It's up to you now to make the most of it. And the time has come to really rethink it, and instead of being just an adjunct to a process that is going beyond anybody's will, try to be a governor in the good cybernetic sense, in the sense in which you govern a process cybernetically, so that you bring the right information at the right time. It's been said that nothing is as powerful as an idea whose time has come, and it's true. The idea of holism has come today, and it is becoming powerful, but it has to become powerful enough to change politics, to change business, and to change or even our educational system. It's beginning to change it, but let's further it. That's a good task to have. So my hope is that your instinctual background, tradition, will come through and will guide also your technological powers, technological development. Not to exploit, not to separate, not to create just irreversible processes, but create reversibility, create recyclability, create saving on all levels, and create a flow of information that we can use. Flow of information which is ideally education. And if there's a single recipe for our future, I think, it's informed education. Information through education on all levels, from kindergarten, from the first level onto the graduate school. And my hope is that Korea will use our instinctive, intuitive insights into the world to create an educational system in which our coherence, our oneness, our harmony with the world will become a dominant aspect.
오늘 아주 흥미로운, 한국에서는 상당히 보기 드문 강연을 해주신 어빈라슬로 박사님께 큰 박수를 보내주셨으면 감사하겠습니다.